Oh, thank you for having us, David. On that very bright note we got earlier from Martin, I do want to talk about Trigg and what we're doing, but also around ESG credentials and the forward-facing conversation that we're hearing around mining and minerals. And I know we hear a lot about it, but what I really want to talk about is something that's important to all of us, no matter what's going on globally, and that is food. Our ability to eat food is essential for our existence. So imagine being a shareholder of a resources company that can contribute to the food source of hundreds of millions of people every single day for at least a generation. And imagine that resources company doing that without an open pit, an underground mine, a rock waste dump, or a tailings storage facility. That's what we're doing at Trigg. We are looking to develop a new world-class source of such a product that's vital for our global food security. That is sulphate of potash. Next slide. And the next one, we have a lot of disclaimers given the stage of this project at scoping level. But as we advance that will be reduced over time. But on this slide, I want everyone to have two key takeaways here. On the left, we've amassed some 45 years experience now in sulphate of potash. It's considered quite a new mineral in Australia. We haven't yet really achieved commercial production, although there has been a first sale in this sector. So it's quite new, and it's quite new to be looking for minerals in brine. But across that team, we've got experience all the way from exploration through to project financing, bank debt, commissioning, and even into that production. And on the right-hand side, the enterprise value. Now, I presented last week, our EV was about $3 million, which is really quite remarkable given what I'm talking about today. And it's now 5. So we're on the return. Next slide. The projects are in Western Australia, which is the tier 1 location for mining projects globally. Western Australia is ranked as the #1 jurisdiction. The projects are all quite close together actually as well, about 170 kilometres east of Laverton. And our #1 project, Lake Throstle, is a globally significant greenfields discovery made just last year. We've also completed a scoping study that indicates we'll have low operating costs with an initial mine life of 21 years and at a global top 10 production rate. And this is just the beginning of the Lake Throstle story. It also has excellent transport logistics. And in the federal government budget update just this week, they've confirmed the available funds to complete the sealing of the Great Central Road and all of the connecting roads to become the Outback Highway across Central Australia. So we anticipate we'll have a highway to our mine gate by the time we're in construction. Next slide. As I said, this is about global food security. We have some 8 billion people on the planet that we need to feed each and every day. And that is only going to increase. We're also seeing changing demographics. We're all wanting more and more nutritious, high-value foods. And we're increasingly urbanised. We're building on a lot of that arable land and degrading the arable land that we need to produce our food. So the numbers are something like in the 1960s, we needed to feed 2 people per hectare. Now we need to feed 5 people per hectare, and that is only going to increase. We've also seen in the last 18 months an escalation in geopolitics that is showing it is having a massive disruption to the supply side of fertilisers. Next slide. So why sulphate of potash? Well, it is a really clean fertiliser that provides just macronutrients the plants need, potassium and sulphur. Without them, we're just not going to get the yields to feed the people that we need to feed. It's also vitally important for many crops that cannot tolerate any addition of chloride, such as fruit, vegetables, avocados, coffee beans, grapes, all the good stuff in our diets that we're all told to eat plenty of need sulphate of potash to grow. And importantly, as I said, we're needing to feed more and more people from less and less arable land. And the only way we can do that is with mineral fertilisers, which now account for some 50% of our food. So if you think about dinner tonight, half that food on your plate is from mineral fertiliser. The other half, the minerals have been mined from the soils. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have seen massive disruption in the supply side in the last 18 months. At point A on this graph, the first sanctions were declared directly against Belarusian potash supply, and Belarus contributes to about 20% of global potash supply. At point B, China responded and has continued to respond by restricting exports of agricultural inputs. And at point C, sorry, the C is a little bit smaller than the A and B on the graph, but that's when Russia invaded Ukraine. And Russia contributes as well to the global potash supply. So we are seeing massive disruption. And you can see the impact in this graph on the price. It has doubled and has been sustained since that occurred. And that's important because when we did the scoping study on our project in October last year, we had a pretty steady price assumption. We thought it was pretty fair at $550 a tonne, but it has now been sustained at over $1,000 a tonne since then. Next slide. So in summary, the impact that we've seen on the global supply disruption is unprecedented, and it is affecting some 50% of the global supply of both muriate and sulphate of potash. Also in China, it accounts for some 2/3 of the global sulphate of potash production. And they're restricting exports. So where is Australia going to get its sulphate of potash from? And frankly, the rest of the world, where are we going to get this essential mineral fertiliser that we need for our global food security? Next slide. So Lake Thrussell, as I mentioned before, it is an incredible discovery. It is large, it is high grade. We have already identified some 14.5 million tonnes of sulphate of potash drainable in the resource, because we're talking about minerals dissolved in the brine. This is a hypersaline brine in ancient riverbed systems that have created these salt lakes. That scoping study is based on less than half of that resource, and it suggests a 245,000 tonne per annum production rate, which is global top 10. It also has a mine life, an initial mine life of 21 years. So this is just the starting point, what we're talking about here. With quite a low, when you look at that prevailing price of US over $1,000 a tonne, our estimated all-in sustaining cost of US $272 a tonne. We've got more to do here. We've got a lot more strike length to drill. We've got twice the strike length of what we've got in that resource under granted tenure. And you can see another project just to the south there. It's 35 kilometres to the south and in the same Paleo Valley system. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So what does this look like as a project? As I said, there's no open pit. So this is not a cross-section of an open pit. This will all stay in situ. What we're looking at is the minerals dissolved in the very, very salty water. It's about 8 times saltier than seawater. And it starts from just below our feet on the lake bed. You can dig a hole and there's the water. It's really quite incredible. And it is very extensive. What we're seeing here is a very, very wide paleo valley, a glacial valley that's up to 6 kilometres wide and up to about 150 metres deep. To access the brine and pump that brine out sustainably is through trenches in that surface network and the bores in a network pumping from the basal aquifers, and there's a variety of aquifers that we'll be targeting. It's also using solar evaporation. The halite crystallisers are on lake ponds, so the salt stays in the system. Halite is our table salt. That needs to drop out of the brine first up before we then take it off the lake, and in the traditional process we go into what is called kainite type or potassium type mixed salt crystallisers off the lake in ponds, further evaporation before it goes into a purification process. But what this does, it produces a very low carbon source of a very natural mineral fertiliser, when the majority of the production globally is synthetic and it uses a lot of energy and has some environmental implications by using sulfuric acid in the process and producing hydrochloric acid as a waste product. So what we're looking here at Lakes Russell is a long life, natural source of sulphate of potash for our global food security. Next slide. So what are we doing at the moment? Well, keeping that momentum up, we listed just 3 years ago, made the discovery, did a scoping study, and now we're advancing our studies to make sure we build a really robust project. So we have a bulk evaporation trial underway, and this will produce our first sulphate of potash, which we can then present to potential offtake partners for analysis. We're also reviewing alternative pathways to improve that reliability. Is there a smarter way to do it than what has always been done before? So we've got a number of study streams underway to have a look at that and see if we can gain more control over the process. We're also looking at how we can fully optimise the brine. In our brine, we've got a lot more sulphate than we have potassium, some 32 million tonnes of sulphate ions. We also have a lot of magnesium, so exploring what that might mean on the revenue side of the project and making sure by doing this that we minimise waste and maximise recovery. We're doing some more drilling, resource definition work to advance the resource and increase the confidence in that resource. And we've also been working at the environmental approvals, which started last year as well. Next slide. So the Trigg investment case, potash is essential for global food security. Sanctions and domestic policies have absolutely disrupted half the world's traditional potash supply. We need to find more secure supplies of potash, particularly sulphate of potash. Trigg has outstanding ESG credentials, being able to produce this using solar evaporation. It will be Australian made. It's a premium product coming from Australia, a natural product with low greenhouse gas emissions, and it is suitable for all agriculture. The project is located in a world-class mining jurisdiction in Western Australia, which is my backyard, and Lakes Russell is set to become a top 10 global low-cost producer and a multi-decade operation. Thank you.
Keren, thanks for a great presentation. Clearly a project that has world-scale significance. Quick question, in terms of the Australian market, how much do you think the Australian market, given it is a net importer, is desperately calling out for a project like this to solve its import issues in the Australian market? And does sovereignty play a role, given what's been happening geopolitically, that all of a sudden now a number of groups, even if there's a slight price discrepancy, are keen to make sure that that net import position is rectified?
Yes. When I speak with Australian farmers, there is great concern around supply chain and their inputs. And they have, even before any of those disruptions occurred, they were telling me that they are always concerned about how they get their hands on enough of the fertilisers that they need. And as you said, Australia is a net importer. We need I think it's up to about some 200,000 tonnes per annum of all of the potash. And we are importing that. So it would be absolutely fantastic to see Australia become more secure in our food source by having all of the fertilisers available domestically for our agricultural product.
And I won't talk to other projects, but how important is it to not rush the process and actually understand the extraction techniques and the best way to maximise the production opportunities?
Yeah, this is a new industry for Australia, so we are developing the IP as we go with that. And from my perspective as a mining engineer, I like to build things and do it right the first time. I don't like surprises, so I want to make sure that we go through all the really vigorous and rigorous analysis process of going through a scoping study, a pre-feasibility and a feasibility study, and make sure that we really are building the right project up front the first time, and being very efficient with shareholder capital, because it's all about making sure that we create value for all of our stakeholders, in particular our shareholders.
And in terms of infrastructure, obviously road plays a big role, but does port and port access play a role? And if so, do you have enough? Obviously it's a little way down the track, but is there enough port opportunities for potential export?
Yes, we've done the initial studies as part of the scoping study, and I did fail to mention that there's a rail terminal at Leonora. It's about 300 kilometres west of the project. So it's bitumen through to Leonora, and then it can go in, if it's going to be containerised and bagged, into the port of Fremantle near Perth in Western Australia, or bulk can go out through Esperance as well.
Now, historically, a good question here. The SOP market historically has been pretty tight, and new competitors haven't been welcomed with open arms. And particularly on the Eastern European side, they've created price pressure to make it hard for new entrants. Do you think the geopolitical situation has changed to make it more likely that a project such as this will get up, even if there was competition that came from Eastern Europe or other sources?
I'm not sure about the Eastern Europe source. If it's being referenced, Mannheim production, that is the secondary synthetic process, which is predominantly done in Europe and in China. And as we've all been hearing in the headlines, the access to energy is really quite stark in Europe. So that is challenging the ability to produce the synthetic sulphate of potash. When we've been out on the road doing the road shows and talking internationally, we've had a lot of interest from international groups in regards to this project. So I don't see that being a barrier to entry.
Last question. The Australian investor market, or even the sort of the funding market, is focused primarily on lithium, cobalt, manganese, graphite, etc. And projects such as yours, and you've been on record saying it, have found it difficult to get large-scale investor support. How does that differ overseas? What are you seeing in the North American and the European markets in terms of potential funding support or investment support into a project such as this?
Well, I think in Australia, we've been very focused on the clean energy debate because we feel very secure in our food, and we haven't felt sufficiently disrupted. Yes, we did have Iceberg Gate earlier in the year, and that is probably coming forth again with the recent floods in the East Coast. But I think we just aren't taking into account the entire food supply chain for us to be able to produce that. Globally, they are feeling more pressure on that. And I think that's what the difference is between the Australian and the international investor market.
On that note, thank you, Keren, for a great presentation. Clearly a project with global significance and could play a key role in overcoming the import deficits or the production deficits which lead to the import pressures for companies looking to acquire products such as yours on a clear path with a clear plan. Keren, thanks for your time, and we look forward to following the story with interest.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate it.